Welcome to the Alchemy Consulting Group podcast. Join Arquella Hargrove, Alchemy's Chief Culture Officer, for impactful conversations with business leaders and experts who are committed to transforming their work cultures and creating inclusive work environments. Let's learn, develop, and garner best practices together. Enjoy this episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Alchemy Consulting Group podcast, where we distill conversations with thought leaders to bring you transformative insights and strategies. Our mission is to revolutionize organizational cultures, one business at a time. And join us as we explore vital topics that empower leaders, galvanize teams, and reshape the world of work. Let the alchemy begin. And I am so excited to have a legal guru in the room, virtual room with us, Obi, and Obi's going to introduce herself, and she is the Alchemy Consulting Group attorney as well. So I'm excited to have her here in the studio with us. So Obi, if you can share a little bit more about your background.
Hello, everyone. My name is Obi, and I am a business attorney and strategist. My mission is helping women-led businesses, especially minority women-led businesses, to fortify their legal foundation and scale. So I do this by helping them protect their intellectual property, helping them develop strategies that leverage their intellectual property. Most importantly, ensure that they have a legal foundation that is sound as they are growing their businesses and making more money.
Obi, we're so glad you are with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And Arquella, I know you and I have spent so much time in both the HR and the DEIB spaces, but what we're here to talk about today, to me, is more of like core HR topic. So do you want to introduce the topic and why we're talking today with Obi?
Yeah, definitely. And so some of you may have, I always tell people, right, these employment laws are changing all the time. And we're really here today to talk about those non-compete agreements. And so who better else, right, than Obi to come and talk to us about non-compete agreements, what's going on with changing legislation. And, also there's some, talk about pending. So, Obi, if you can really come and share with us, what's the basics, starting with the basics around what are non-compete agreements, and then why do we need them in our businesses? Why should they matter? So I think if we start there with the basics and the overview, I think that's going to be very helpful.
Okay. So traditionally, non-competes are agreements, contracts that are signed between an employer and an employee. And essentially, without using too much legalese, the goal of a non-compete, or what non-competes do, is that they prevent the employee from working for a competitor or starting their own business within a certain amount of time after they end employment with their employer. So essentially what happens, employee signs non-compete, the non-compete says for a period of 2, 3, 4, some non-competes are very expensive, 5-10 years, you are not able to work within, and sometimes they may set time limits or distance limits or things like that. But essentially it's to prevent the employee from setting up a competing business close to the employer, using things like that. So that's generally the base definition of a non-compete.
Are there certain industries, Obi, where you see non-compete agreements used more?
Yes, tech, definitely tech. Especially if that company is coming out with something new or innovative. I see it a lot in the healthcare industry. I see it a lot in the beauty industry too, lifestyle industries. So it really just depends. I would say overall, I've seen it across a broad range of industries, but certain industries use them more than some industries, tech, startups, that type of thing, use them more than others. But what I am noticing, before this rule came into place, is that more and more companies, whether it's consulting or things like that, were starting to use non-competes just because it was a way for them to protect themselves and protect their business.
Well, Obi, as Arquella alluded to, things are changing in the non-compete landscape. So tell us a little bit about those changes. And then if you can, give us your perspective, like why now? Why are these changes being implemented now?
Okay. So in April, a new rule or the rule was finalized, and essentially what it says, the FTC was saying that non-competes will no longer are no longer enforceable. Okay, so after September, employers cannot use non-competes anymore, and so what it would except in certain situations, okay, except in certain situations, but what that would mean is that the employees who have non-competes in place would have to notify their employees, whether current or former, that these non-competes are no longer enforceable. And for me, I think it's a good thing. Okay. And I think it's a bad thing. I can understand. I've heard a mix. Some people are excited because it does allow more people. It does allow more people. So I have little ones. So it's the week before school starts. So you may hear my little one, I have a 5-year-old, 2-year-old who may pop their heads in from time to time. So I'm actually okay with the non-competes because what I have found is that for some employers, whether fear-based or just business-based, the non-competes were overly restrictive. Okay. And so what it meant is that an employee could not work, could not start their own business. And so you're kind of, you have control over what they can do, who they can work with, and you're limiting the money. Okay. And so that's one of the reasons that the FTC gave for this in terms of it's a way to stimulate business. Okay. And so they estimated that there are about 30 million workers or 1 in 5 are subject to non-competes. So now with no non-competes happening, that means more money. And they had this really interesting graphic that showed how much money would be able to how much it would increase the economy for different states with no non-competes. So for me, I do think it's a good thing. For the people who are worried, there are still ways people start non-competes to protect their business. I mean, and I get it. You have worked hard to build this business. You've made money. You've put a lot of effort, your brain, your creativity, and you are trying to protect what you've created. But there are definitely other ways to protect your business, whether it's confidentiality agreements, whether it's NDAs, things like that. If your business is one that has trade secrets, essentially what trade secrets means is that these things that no one knows, but that's a driving force behind your business. Okay. So an example of this would be, think of the Coca-Cola recipe, think of the KFC spice recipe. These are all, trade secrets so I'm always going to tell a company, if you have what I call the special sauce, okay, this thing that is the life force of your business, you want to limit how many people know about it. So definitely not every employee should have access to it unless they're at a senior level or they're on a need to know. That's what I'll say. Okay. So yes, I'm in agreement with the non-compete. I do think it levels the playing field, but for those who are worried that it does put their IP or their business at risk, there's definitely still ways for employers to protect their business.
Okay. Obi, based on what you said, any non-competes that are in place now, they expire August 31st, September 1st, get a little granular for us.
September 4th. So after September 4th, they will no longer be enforceable. So what employers need to do is let past employees know, hey, this is not enforceable anymore, and let obviously any new coming employee will not be subject to a non-compete, but you're supposed to notify old employees, notify current employees that these are the changes that are being made. And just make sure that everyone is in understanding of these changes and what's happening. Now, of course, non-competes will still be enforceable for senior executives. For the main part, for the main part, it's senior executives that you can still enforce it for.
So those are
that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, especially at that level, because they typically do have those employment agreements, right? Definitely at that level, right? And again, I know, just September 4th is the date, right, Obi? And so what does this mean for future, right? We know that executive levels, right, they would still have their employment agreements, but what about the future of other type of agreements? What protections are available to employers and employees? And even know for myself on the consulting side, I know you're working to update like even our agreements for contractors and employees. So again, changing some of that language. And so if you can talk about the future for those agreements.
So the future for agreements is really paying attention. So if you had a non-compete, obviously that's null and void. You can't do that anymore. But then start thinking about if you're sharing, even if it's not a trade secret, confidential information, or you're sharing certain types of information, you may want to consider an NDA, a stronger NDA, okay? Sometimes some people have their NDAs within their main contract, and some people have their employees it's a standalone contract, okay? So that there's that clear delineation. Non-solicitation agreements. So the FTC does allow you to have non-solicitation agreements as long as they are not really as uber restrictive, okay? Because some non-solicitation agreements, they look at it as being similar to non-compete because they restrict the employer or the employee, okay? So if you have a non-solicitation agreement that says, hey, for a period of 1 year, that employee can't talk to current clients or reach out or, current employees or anything like that, as long as it's fair and it's not that non-compete is not going to prevent them from starting a business, okay? Because if they're not reaching out to current clients, they can find other clients, okay? But before, what non-competes would do would mean that they could not start a business that is similar, okay? And sometimes you'd see it for 5 years, 10 years or whatever, which means that if this is your trade, you can't even start a business in it. So non-solicitation agreements, making sure that is strong, that's in your contract, but it's fair, okay? Confidentiality agreements, that's another way to protect your information. So at the crux of this, a lot of people are worried about intellectual property, okay? And how their information and their maybe client lists and things is going to be protected, okay? So there are ways to do it. I would definitely say just stronger contracts in terms of how people are accessing information, or at the senior level, management thinks of how people are. So you may say certain employees don't need access to certain information because it's a need to know. And those that do have access to that information, they understand that it's limited to the use in, working. So some things that I run across for companies is, and I'll always ask them, if you have independent contractors or things like that, do your contractors understand that your work, your IP, the things you've created for use in your company, that they can't use it because they're independent contractors and not employees? Do they understand that information that you're giving them access to, okay, whether it's to use for your clients, that they can't use that for anyone else? And there has to be that clear delineation for them to know this is strictly for XYZ, our company use. You do not have permission to use it or make copies or things like that for personal use or for other work that you do, things like that.
Well, Obi, I know this is going to take some change management for some organizations, as I'm thinking through like employment agreements, and that non-compete language was standard oftentimes throughout the organization. So I know our HR colleagues, Arquella, are hard at work making those changes. But Obi, let me ask you, I know we've spent a lot of time talking about this, but share with us, is there anything else on the HR legal front that has been occupying a lot of your time? Any other topics that our listeners need to be aware of?
It really varies. Again, with AI being the new hot thing, I'm having to tell people, sometimes clients will come to me to say, I don't really want my employees to not use AI, but I'm not sure how to protect the company. Now, one thing, and I'm going to get a little nerdy here. They should. Every software that you use has terms and conditions, okay? And what you may not understand with the terms and conditions is how are they using their data? Are they using their data or your data? How are they using your data? So let's take, and I'm just going to use OpenAI because it's well known. There is in the settings for OpenAI, there is an option that says you can toggle the bottom button on or off. Use my data to train the model or not. Okay. And so before that, people were just putting in data, sensitive company information and things like that. So, now OpenAI has access to your proprietary information and you don't know if it's going to be used for output for anywhere else type of thing. So things I tell people to think about, especially on the HR basis, is what is your policy when it comes to AI use? Okay. Are you okay with AI use? And if you're okay with AI use, are there limits? Okay. And there's some types of AI that they can use or not use. And have you, as the HR leader or anything, have you read the terms and conditions? And if you haven't read the terms and conditions, that's not a problem. Have an attorney read the terms and conditions, because when I read the terms and conditions, a lot of people don't know that how, for lack of a better word, intrusive or invasive it can be and what they can do with your information. And so there are some AI companies that use your facial, if you are making videos, they can use that for output and other things. And so for me, I read everything. Okay. And so what that has done, it means, just for my personal use, it means there's certain things I won't touch. Okay. Just because I'm like, your terms and conditions are too wild for me. Okay. But then there are other things that I'm like, okay, I use OpenAI. I have made it such, my settings are set that I don't share my data with them. Same thing with whatever AI. So I would say it's up to the HR leader or, executive or anything to just kind of make sure that they understand, like, what software can your employees use, whether on your systems or not on your systems, and understanding of how your data is used and protected. Or for some people, I know some of my clients are like, nope, no AI whatsoever, because it's too sticky. Okay. Earlier when OpenAI happened, and I'm not sure, I don't know if it's Samsung, or there was a company that there was a huge, because of AI, proprietary information was fed to the company, and it was just this big data leak. Okay. It exposed their proprietary information. So these are the kind of things that I think about where I'm saying, pay attention to what your employees are using. So that's that bit. On the intellectual property bit, again, because your IP is kind of your brainchild of how your company runs. What did your IP policy say? How can employees use this? How can they not use it? Are there limits? What is it in terms of sharing? Okay. Other things that I will always tell people to be concerned about in terms of data. How is your data safeguarded? Okay. If you're taking data from clients, how is your client's data safeguarded? Because sometimes an employee may be working on their personal computer. Do you allow that or do you not allow that? Okay. And if they're working on their personal computer, are there things they can use and not use? So it's the little things that we think aren't a big deal that end up being the biggest deal. So.
Those are great points. Thank you, Obi. Yeah. And I always, recommend, like, I think about, for our internal team, right? They have, company issue laptops, right? They work off of. And again, that, there's processes and procedures in place for sure. And as I said, right, Obi is updating our agreements, right? Not only for contractors and employees, but also for clients. And so definitely I always recommend, at this point, this is a great opportunity for everyone to take a look at those agreements and just making sure that those changes are being made as well.
Yes.
Obi, are there any other resources, before we close out, any other additional resources that you can share with employers or small business owners that might be helpful around these topics that you've just shared with us?
If for anyone who is curious on the FTC rule, if you go to ftc.gov, they have information. The rule itself is hundreds of pages. I think, what is it, 570 pages or something like that. But they do have distilled versions of the rule where you can, where it talks about how you need to know. So you can notify employees, whether email, mail, in person, that type of thing. So, but you can find updates for that. Let's see. That would be the main one. For companies that have, whether in-house legal or, outsource legal, I'm always going to say, every once in a while, have a conversation with your attorney just to make sure that you guys are on the up and up. So like Arquella talked about, I'm updating the contracts and things like that because the contract governs the relationship. I can't talk enough about how much the contract governs your relationship with the employee, what's good, what's not, in the event of a separation. And how often are you refreshing your contracts? How often are you giving them a reminder to say, hey, re-sign this maybe after a year or two, especially if when they started and was 2 or 3 years ago, and now you've had a lot of updates to your company. Are you making them aware of those updates and new rules and things like that? So legal is definitely a good way to touch base with your legal if you have in-house legal, or maybe a good time to think about outsourcing legal or someone who's familiar with employment and things like that, just to make sure that, for example, how you treat independent contractors is very different from how you treat employees. They're two, and so many people make the mistake of almost treating their independent contractors like employees. So by the time an issue happens, there's no clear line. Mm-hmm. So legal is always a good thing to think about. But yeah.
So how can people get in touch with you?
So
if they don't want to read the 570 pages.
Yeah,
I have it all summarized. So
narrow it down for us.
Yeah, I can narrow it down for you. So email, you can reach out at info@ikemeLaw.com. So info Ikeme Law. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, Obi Ikeme. On other socials such as Instagram, but these days I'm on LinkedIn. So you can send me an email. People always want to chat about what it takes for the next step for legal or just contracts and things like that. So, and then we can set up a time for us to have a conversation.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Well, I definitely highly recommend Obi. She's wonderful. And again, a great legal mind. And so definitely check Obi out for sure. And so great conversation. I'm excited. And again, just making sure, we're always making sure we're staying in compliance. And so we want to make sure that we have our legal team in place for that. And so this wraps our dialogue here at the Alchemy Consulting Group podcast. And we want to thank everyone for tuning in and engaging with us on this journey towards enriching organizational culture and leadership. And remember that each conversation is a step toward transformation. And so asking you all to continue to lead, innovate, and thrive until we connect again. Be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast. Until the next time.
Thank you for tuning in to the Alchemy Consulting Group podcast. Follow this podcast on social media and help continue the conversation by sharing your business and leadership best practices. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you consume yours, and share this podcast with your organizations and networks. Let's strengthen the community of those committed to responsible leadership and work environments where everyone can thrive.